And now, AM 650 presents your source for leading-edge news and information on today's hottest products and services. This is Experts on Call on AM 650.
Well, hello and welcome to Experts on Call. I'm Stirling Faux, joined in studio by the president and founder of ClinicalSleep Solutions. Cox Tan-Ngo is back with us. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I am fine, thank you. We've survived a Super Bowl,
Yes.
you and I. And,
Yes.
I've got a study here, Cox, that I just found the other day from the folks at the London Sleep Center in England. And I read it with great interest because I saw it a few days before the Super Bowl, knowing full well that I was going to be gathering with some family and friends and probably going to have a drink or two during the game. And this is all about sleep research and alcohol. And the people in London say, and this is quintessentially British writing here. I'm just gonna read you one line. A tipple before bedtime may get you off to sleep faster, but it can disrupt your night's slumber, say the researchers at the London Sleep Center. They say that a few drinks, they produce the three changes in your body. Number one, it accelerates sleep onset. If you've had a few pops, you generally speaking can get to sleep faster.
That's right.
Number two, it gets you into pretty deep sleep pretty quickly. So those two would be the desirable elements of having a few pops before going to bed. However, and this is where it gets a little dodgy. The third of the three changes, according to these researchers, is fragmented sleep patterns once the alcohol effects wear off, and they say the second half of that night of sleep won't be anywhere near as pleasant as the first half.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the thoughts of most individuals who use alcohol, for example, as a means to try to fall asleep is the fact that they associate falling asleep as sleep. But the reality is sleep is the totality of the time that you get to bed, from the time that you go to sleep to the time that you wake up. But then the challenge is when people have insomnia is they associate it, because insomnia is the difficulty to fall asleep.
Right.
And so they associate it to that, and so they think that by drinking alcohol and the fact that they can fall asleep quicker would be the cure to their insomnia, but they don't realize they don't sleep any better as a result.
Well, and that's really interesting because it is a popular urban myth. And certainly if you watched any of the commercials on the Super Bowl game, there are a few companies involved
That's right.
in perpetrating that urban
Yeah.
myth. So, and it's nothing wrong with having a couple of drinks, certainly in a social situation. But I think the thrust here, and you're the Clinical Sleep Solutions guy, is that to rely on alcohol as some kind of device to routinely produce sleep is really wrong-headed and can be, well, I think medically quite flawed.
Yeah, and for the same reason, general sedatives, for that matter, are very, are very important to understand, because if you don't understand what you're taking and what you're trying to do for yourself, you get a false sense of what you're trying to achieve, but you really don't achieve anything at the end of it.
And this would be, okay, I don't drink a lot, or I don't really think that relying on alcohol every night before going to bed is a particularly smart idea. I know I'll go to the drugstore and I'll get some of those sleeping pills.
Yeah.
I saw those on TV. Well, it's not booze, so it's probably not going to mess me up as much. And I'll definitely feel better when I wake up in the morning. There won't be any hangover issues. Yeah, pill. That's the solution.
Yeah. And that's where our society has come to. It's the quick fix. Instead of trying to understand what's really going on with their sleep, they want the quick fix, which is take a little sip here and there, or take the pill and off I go. But then they'll go through their lives maybe a year or two and they realize, hey, nothing's really gotten any better. I don't feel any better. I don't sleep any better. Sure, I fall asleep.
Right.
But then by the time I wake up, I'm still tired and exhausted. So what's really going on?
Right. Well, let's talk about that because it's an interesting way. So we've sort of backed into the conversation. But let's talk about what really is going on. Why the sleeping pills? Why the glass of wine or fill in the blank alcoholic favorite remedy isn't going to work on a regular basis? What really is going on with those sort of defective sleep patterns?
Well, it could be a result of so many things. There's so many sleep disorders out there, or any combination of sleep disorders out there, that if you don't really try to start to tick them off one by one and address those issues one by one, you're never going to resolve your sleep. Something as simple as falling asleep at the right time or getting to sleep at the right time. So we're talking about circadian rhythms or sleep patterns. Yeah, if a person is sleeping one day at 9:30, the next day at 12:30, and then the next day at 2 o'clock, and then back to 10 o'clock, you're never regulating your sleep pattern, and your body, being a creature of habit, we all, all creatures in the planet actually work on hormonal patterns and cycles. And if we don't have a proper cycle for ourselves, your body doesn't know when to release certain hormones for sleep and wake at the right times, and so you never really feel rested.
And this is particularly a notable problem in people who work shift work for a living, professionals and people who just have, particularly if you rotate, you've worked graveyards for a couple of weeks and then afternoons and then days, and I mean, your whole, your body and I refer to them as biorhythms. That was kind of the catchy thing a while ago. But your body's natural rhythms really just never get a chance to lock in. You're constantly interrupting that. So now you're the sleep professional here. When you are dealing with someone who, for a living, works these bizarre, repetitive off patterns, how do you coach those people with respect to trying to get a good night's sleep despite their weird hours?
Well, the first thing I always ask is, can you change your job? But obviously that's not always
not
the
always
case.
Possible,
but
right.
It's a fair question.
Sure it is.
Because I think, if you value your sleep enough, and I've had people who have said to themselves, I've had enough, and I really need to change my life, and and they're able to try to dictate, at least for the most part, 5 out of the 7 days of their week. But it is very challenging, and I think the ultimate thing is to understand what the difficulties are, because not everybody who does shift work also has difficulty sleeping.
True.
But when you start to plot out a person's diary, or a sleep diary as we call it, we start to see what the tendencies of the individual are. How quickly can they fall asleep? How quickly can they maintain a good night's sleep when they shift from one day to another.
Okay.
Those things are important to understand, so that you can see how complex the individual is. And if the person is really out of sync and you really can't do anything, then you start to intervene by having the medical physicians involved, and trying to help with medication, and maybe even coaching through cognitive behavioral learning and things like that. So all of those things are very important to put together. You don't just say, oh, this, the person does shift work, so this is the one solution for everybody that does shift work.
Well, there's just no such thing as a one-size-fits-all solution for any of these common medical conditions. And I think it's also probably worthwhile reiterating, because we do this when we get together on the radio, that this is not weird or bizarre. The sleep deprivation or difficulties with sleeping are a pretty common human condition in 2013, aren't they?
It is the Industrial Revolution that caused it, really. I mean, when we were all farmers at one point, we dictated our sleep and wake by the cycle of the rise and fall of the sun, but now we don't. We depend on alarm clocks, we depend on our schedules for work, and so we are artificially creating our own sleep problems.
Okay, now, with that in mind, are the sleep problems that you're saying that in some ways we're creating for ourselves, are these real or are they imagined? Are we talking some people who just don't get to sleep because they've psyched themselves out of a good night's sleep, or is that too simplistic?
That is too simplistic. I think it is a real phenomenon that's occurring. I mean, aside from you can base it on population, but if you look at percentages, I think we are percentage-wise a population base that is having more sleep issues than we've ever had in the past.
I believe that, yeah. And I would think, here's a 5-letter word that is a far too commonplace in most of our daily lives and routines. How about stress? Ay, ay, ay. Now that, it's real.
Yes.
because by gosh, we sure feel it. And in many cases, it is a real sleep inhibitor, isn't it?
Yes, for
If you
sure.
got, your brain is just burning. You got all this stuff going on, and you got to balance the books and make your mortgage payment and get to work on time, and baby needs new shoes and a million other things. And how do you relax your brain? There's no way we can press something on the side of our head and hit neutral when it's time to go to sleep, is there?
That's right. That's right. And even when you wake up after thinking you've fallen asleep, you're back to square one. So you're physically exhausted, mentally exhausted, and then that adds to the stress level even more.
Okay, now we are also talking about sleep issues beyond the psychological, and really in many cases, not all, but in many cases, the inability to get a good night's sleep is a simple medical situation. There is a medical problem that disallows that individual from getting a decent night's sleep.
Yes.
And it's all about breathing or inability to breathe clearly and properly, right?
That's right.
So,
and so when you and what you're talking about is obstructive sleep apnea as a condition.
Okay.
And you know, we've been on this topic for quite a number of months now, and certainly sleep apnea is a significant phenomenon also, especially since obesity is a prominent phenomenon that is in our society.
Certainly
these days.
is.
So when you think about that, and now we're talking about a physical blockage of the airway while we're sleeping, that it's a type of sleep disorder, but it's probably one of the easier sleep disorders to manage, assuming it's the run-of-the-mill sleep apnea without any complicating factors. But for the most part, it's easy enough to identify, and it's easy enough to treat, because there is a process in which we can go about things, and it's pretty similar for every individual that's out there. However, again, if there's complexities, that's you know, a small percentage of the group, but the majority of people are easily managed if they've been identified to have sleep apnea through a sleep study and they've been treated using CPAP therapy.
Okay, how does one go about? Suppose now, let's go right back to square one, because we have to do this, because people are joining us for the first time. Hopefully we've got a few people who have heard us before and who are enjoying the learning process that you are so skillful at taking us through every time we get together, Cox. But there are some joining us for the first time who literally haven't had a good night's sleep in so long they can't even remember the last time. And they're just messed right up. They've had it. Their lives, they're just at the end of their tether. And life isn't very much fun. It never is when you're not well rested, period.
Yeah.
So how does someone who feels that wrung out and strung out begin to gather one's wits about him or her and formulate a game plan that says, enough already, it's time to confront this monster and get on with the rest of my life?
Well, again, because obstructive sleep apnea is probably one of the easier ones to identify, I think the first thing you look at is just the simple symptoms that a person with sleep apnea might have. So if you think of snoring, so if you're feeling run out and your wife or your spouse basically says you're snoring all the time, that's a good indicator that you might have the problem. And so not everybody who snores has the problem, but it's a good chance that if you're snoring extremely loud and it's bothering everybody in your household, that you're probably going to have the problem. So get that screened for yourself. Get a sleep study done and see if that is the problem. If it is, then great. You've identified one major source of the problem, and then you get treatment for that. But if another thing that you can associate to that, which is easily passed on as other things, is being tired every day, falling asleep in the wheel, feeling like you're always waking up in the middle of the night and having to go to the washroom. All of those things are other identifying symptoms related to sleep apnea that you might be able to consider and identify very easily.
Our guest is the president and founder of Clinical Sleep Solutions with 5 clinics around the Vancouver area. Cox Tan-Ngo is in studio for Experts on Call. I'm Stirling Faux. Lots more ahead. Stay with us.
There's still more ahead with Experts on Call, the show focused on delivering relevant and beneficial consumer information. This is Experts on Call on AM 650.